Hey everybody, so here is the second part of those intro to rhetorical analysis notes that I'd like you to review and take care of outside of class for week 3. So some things we are going to be talking about in class. Soapstone we're going to talk about in class because looking at your summer work, I feel like you have a nice handle on that. We're going to do a little bit more with annotation and also with fallacies. But this section of notes, we are going to have you guys work on outside of class. So hopefully the Ed Puzzle is working well because I'm going to record these now and then upload them to Ed Puzzle with some questions so I get some feedback from you about these notes. So I'm going to present and get going. Let's see what's up. Where's my face? Where's my face? There's my face. What the heck? I feel like it's nice to have the face. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like it's sort of like a real human is talking to you. Perhaps I should do this. That's what I got to do. Okay, so introduction to rhetorical analysis. We're still working within this idea. I mean, this will be an idea the entire year, but using the available means, right? That when an author, a skilled author, which is honestly all we're going to read, is constructing a text, they think of everything they have at their disposal, all the tactics, all the strategies, all the techniques to create the most persuasive and compelling product, right? And so that's what I mean by using the available means. In these notes, we're going to talk about appeals, which I think you had a very nice handle on in your summer work. Some of you chose them for your rhetorical device choices, but I'd like to go over them anyway, because sometimes they can get slippery. They seem really obvious, but then when you start to look at text, they start to slide back and forth. And fallacies, which I know there are several of them in your cards, and I would like you to think less about naming a fallacy, although sometimes that can be really obvious, like when someone's doing like ad hominem and attacking the person and not the argument. It's fairly obvious. But also just starting to think about these logical gaps, these tricks, these manipulations that are actually untrue, but are used to compel a reader to buy in to a particular argument or position. So those are the focus of these notes. We're going to start with appeals, and we're going to start with appeal to ethos. So ethos is when the writer appeals to the audience's desire for character, credibility, and or authority in a speaker. I feel like ethos is sometimes the one a lot of people struggle with remembering because ethos is not a word maybe you think of commonly in your own vocabulary, but it is the word in which ethics is derived from. So if you're a fan of The Good Place, which I am, and if you're not, it's okay, but I really recommend it. You might know about Chidi Adeganye, who is an ethics professor and is very much the moral and ethical center of that entire series. He is the person with the strongest character. He is the person who is credible. He is the authority in that show that everyone turns to know the difference between right and wrong. So when you're thinking about ethos, it might help you think like Chidi, right? Because he is the guy who is like the ethical standard by which so many people in that show rise to. And if you haven't seen the show, I'm sorry, but I feel like that's a really helpful way to remember this one. So also, if you just think of the word ethics, right, and ethical, it means your character, your sense of right and wrong, your credibility, your authority. So the writer, when appealing to ethos, is trying to make a good impression, and the reader believes the writer knows what he or she is talking about. So whatever they're doing, whatever strategy they're doing, and it might be like, another strategy. They might be like, presenting a personal anecdote. They might be using repetition in a certain way. But in doing that, they create this sense of authority or credibility. And the reader goes, oh, I should listen to this person. They know what they're talking about. That is an appeal to ethos. So in the Malcolm Gladwell, for example, many of you pointed out his use of personal pronouns. And I think there was this sense when he's talking about football in particular, that he's credible because he's not attacking something. He's not like this nerd who says football is bad and hates football and is attacking football. He's like, I am a football fan. And so that kind of builds up his credibility as someone who can argue and critique the practices of football. It is their expertise, their knowledge, their experience, their training, their sincerity, or a combination of those things. So some of you who read the Bill McKibben, for example, the essay about, I love that essay, just so you know, about being accused of being a hypocrite. He opens with this anecdote of being on, I think it's a book tour, and he's going on speaking engagements to speak about the environment. And many of you pointed out that this is appeal to ethos because he's really establishing that he's not just some dude in a Prius. He is an expert on the environment, and he's like a very famous environmental expert and writer. And so in dropping that in, he's appealing to your sense of ethos, right? And building up his own credibility. So with that in mind, the text we're going to be looking at in these notes, just to kind of give you some practice, is this ad from Apple for the iPad. So in 2013, this ad came out. There's a whole series. This was a print ad for the iPad, and there was a whole bunch of them. But this one is the one we're going to look at, where there was an image with some text sort of in the side of the image. And Apple was really pushing those iPads. It was flying high on like so many products, obviously the smartphone and whatnot. But the iPad was its newest thing, and it was trying to sell them to schools. I don't know if you guys were around for the iPad carts, but we bought a bunch of them, and there was just a big push to sell the iPad. And so these ads came out, and a lot of them featured kids because they were trying to push them as things that were good for kids. The text I know here is very small, so I have it here for you, and I'm going to wait till this thing disappears from me. Come on, go away. Go away. Why aren't you going away? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So this is what the text says. It says, this is it. This is what matters. The experience of a product, how it makes someone feel. When you start imagining what that might be like, you step back, you think, who will this help? Will this make life better? Does this deserve to exist? If you are busy making everything, how can you perfect anything? We don't believe in coincidence or dumb luck. There are 1,000 no's for every yes. We spend a lot of time on a few great things until every idea we touch enhances each life it touches. We're engineers and artists, craftsmen and inventors. We sign our work. You may rarely look at it, but you will always feel it. This is our signature, and it means everything. Designed by Apple in California. So that's the text. The image is there as well. This video is going to pause for a sec, and it's going to ask you, first of all, just to identify the definition of appeal to ethos, which I'm sure you'll be fine with. And then it's going to ask you, and there'll be a link to the image in the text, to find one piece of evidence in this which you think demonstrates the writers, in this case the Apple company, appealing to the audience sense of ethos, and how that piece of text does that. So a piece of evidence and some analysis. So it's going to pause now for you to do that. Now we're going to move on to appeal to logos, which is logic, right? And this one I think is a little bit easier because logos and logic are such close related words, and logic is something I think that we can identify maybe more readily. So it's appeals to reason, a sense of logic. The writer references solid facts in support of a sound argument based in clear reasoning. So whenever you see the writer trying to make an argument, whether it's, a reasoning argument where they're kind of pulling a piece of evidence and saying, this is what this means, this is how you should see it, that is appeal to logos. If there's like direct quote of evidence, so in the Gladwell, when he references those studies of tau, of the stuff that are seen in these brain samples, and he brings in the scientists, that's appeal to logos. In the McKibben, he references all the more recent, it's like maybe it's 5 years old, that article. So all the recent environmental disasters that are sort of off the charts as like evidence of climate change, and that, we're kind of in a mess. So all those moments where you bring in evidence and you make arguments about them is appeal to logos. The writer acknowledges the counter argument in appeal to logos, right? It's saying, I know there's this other argument out there that you might say, they might concede strengths of that argument, but then they'll refute what is faulty about the argument. So they're going to kind of engage with the arguments that are out there, and either reason with those arguments and present their other position, or bring up evidence that challenges those arguments. So with appeal to logos, you're appealing to the reader's sense of argument and reasoning. So again, even though maybe this doesn't seem like a very kind of structured, like Supreme Court argument kind of thing, there is argument, I think, in this text. So this is going to pause for you in a sec. It's going to ask you again a multiple choice question about appeal to logos, which will be super easy. And then I'm going to ask you to kind of dig into this text again and see, where do you see here that they're appealing to the reader's sense of logic and argument? Where are they trying to reason with their viewer of this ad, right, and make an argument for the value of their products? So I'll pause, and you'll take a few seconds or minutes, whatever you need, to get that done. Thanks. Okay, so the last appeal is the appeal to pathos, and pathos is emotions. So I find pathos easy to remember, partially because one of my favorite symphonies is the Pathetique, so which I'm mispronouncing. So I don't know, but I always think of pathos as emotion. If you think of words like sympathetic or empathetic, that PATH is the root, right, or is the where the word derives from, and that means emotion, right? To share emotions or to feel somebody else's emotions. So pathos is appeal to the reader's emotional sense. And those emotions can be anything. So it could be, sympathy with the writer. It could be revulsion of the subject. So it could be horror. It could be concern. It could be, distress. It could be, emotions such as love or, connection. It could be lots of emotions, right? But really playing on those emotional heartstrings. So the writer might use figurative language or personal anecdotes in order to connect to the feelings of the reader. I feel like those of you who read the Machado essay about working in the luxury mall, there's a lot of appeal to pathos in that kind of inclusion of these anecdotes of what it's like to be standing on your feet all day in a mall, working in a store, trying to just, make your wage, and then seeing, I don't know if anybody remembers this anecdote, the 11-year-old girl buying the $200 face cream, right? And just like, because she's got to, I don't know, she's got to take care of her wrinkles because, 11, it's a tough year. That's appeal to emotions, right? Clearly that anecdote is supposed to elicit in you, horror or disturbance or like just, confusion. Like, how is this possible that 11-year-olds are buying face creams? I don't even understand that myself. I don't think I even knew about face creams until I was in my 20s. So personal anecdotes can do that. Figurative language can do that as well. So, there's a lot of description and imagery in some of the essays you read over the summer. I think, anecdotes and imagery often go together. And I'm just thinking about all the, description and imagery of the dogfighting in the Gladwell, that is there to appeal to your emotions, right? And make you like, oh my God, this is so upsetting. This is so wrong. This is so sad. And so you have those emotions in your heart when you return to his more logical argument about the NFL. So that's appeal to pathos. The writer might use the first person also to create a humane persona or include personal examples from their life, which I think Gladwell does sprinkle in quite a bit. So you connect with him as a writer, and you feel what he feels. I feel like Machado does that, and so you feel what she feels, and think about how that then helps you buy into her argument. This is the woman who writes about working in the luxury mall. For those of you who didn't pick that essay, she includes, she talks about herself in the first person. She includes these personal examples from her own life where she was financially, why she was working at the mall. So then when she starts to make these arguments about the negative impact psychologically tremendous wealth has on everybody. I mean, that actually is a pretty radical argument, because I feel like if I just said that to people, like, listen, being really rich is bad for everybody's, well-being. My father would be like, you're bananas. But when you read the Machado and you hear about her own kind of emotional response and her struggle, then you buy into the argument. So pathos can kind of lead into an acceptance of the writer's logos. So just think about that, how those things work together. So again, appeal to pathos. So you might want to think about how this image is clearly supposed to like play on your heartstrings a little bit, the way it's set up. But I think in the text as well, there are phrases that are supposed to give you kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling, right? Some kind of feeling about Apple as a company. And I think Apple's really smart doing this. Like, they try to make it seem like, they care about us very deeply, and create some kind of emotional connection. So I will pause, and the same types of questions will pop up. A multiple choice just about appeal to pathos, and then a more open-ended question that asks you to pull some text or some evidence about where you see an appeal to pathos in this particular ad. And then I shall pause. So the last thing we're going to do with this ad is talk about logical fallacies. So I know in your note cards you wrote down lots of logical fallacies. Ad hominem is a logical fallacy. Bandwagon is a logical fallacy. It's very popular. It's like, hey, everybody, let's all get on the cart and do this thing. But it's a fallacy. Whenever anyone says, we should all do this, you should be suspect. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should think, is this logic or is this something else? So they are everywhere, though. They're the ones that are named like in your cards, but they're also just this idea that you are presenting an argument that has weak logic, but you're covering it over in some way. So logical fallacies are weaknesses in argument and often based on a failure to connect the claim and the evidence used to support that claim. So they are very common in advertising, where the advertisement is making a certain claim about a product, where in reality, that claim is unfounded. One of my favorite essays, I think it's Maynard Keynes. It's this economist from the 60s, and he writes, I would love us to read it, but I can never work it in. He writes about how essentially advertisement and capitalism is grounded on manufactured need, that most of the things that companies are telling you you need, you really don't need. And it's a crazy essay because when you read it, you start to think about all the things I've bought I didn't need, but they convinced me I needed. That's logical fallacy. It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy those things. Trust me. I'm a shopper. It's okay. But it's still not about logic. It's about something else, right? So often advertisements make a claim that this is something you need, but there really isn't a whole lot of evidence to support it. So they might rely too heavily on ethos, such as a celebrity endorsement. So if you, speaking of face cream, if you ever watched, or seen an ad where there's a famous celebrity saying, I use this cream, right? Because they want you to go, oh, if I buy Aveeno, I will look like Jennifer Aniston. Like that's a logical fallacy because the cream isn't going to do it, I mean, you might look like her, which is great, but that's just genetics. So without corroborating logos, right? So ethos without any kind of logic or evidence to support their claim. Or they might rely too much on emotion without corroborating logos. Have you ever seen one of those commercials that really tries to make you cry? There's some out there that are just like, they're really trying to make you feel this kind of emotion or sadness or happiness, and then you want to buy the product. This is a fallacy, right? They're using emotion without corroborating logos. False logos is in and of itself a fallacy. For example, equating the effects to the same cause simply because they happen at similar times. So, and I want to give you guys time to kind of say what you think, but if you look at this particular ad, there's a fallacy here in the argument, even like not looking at the text, but just the argument seems to be making with the image is that when you give a child an iPad, they become curious and wondrous, right? And they just are like ready to like stare at this iPad. And this is being presented almost as, look, this child is engaged. But that is false argument, because if you have a child in your household who has an iPad and they stare at the screen all day, I think that's not engagement. That might be zombie-like watching, right? So that's false logos, right? They're trying to present an argument of the impact of an iPad, which may not be supported by any kind of evidence. So sophisticated rhetoricians use logical fallacies effective all the time, especially when people are not skilled analyzers. So you might even be thinking about some of the things you read over the summer, and some of them are very compelling. I mean, I love every essay I posted this summer, but you might look back at them and go, ooh, they had their way with me. They totally pulled me into this, and I bought it. And now I'm taking a step back. I'm thinking, wow, there were some other questions I should have asked about their logic. Maybe yes, maybe no. But fallacies are not just like mistakes or something that, bad writers do. Good writers do it all the time. And the best ones do it without you ever even noticing, which is kind of creepy and impressive. So I'm going to pause now, and this is the last pause. This is going to go to a question about fallacies. There'll be a multiple choice question and then a more open-ended question about what fallacies you see in this ad. It could be in the image, and you're welcome to talk about the image of the child that I brought up and the expression on her face. It could be in the text where you see some kind of fallacy, maybe, misuse of ethos, misuse of pathos, right? An appeal to pathos that doesn't seem to be supported by the actual argument or product, or, a false argument. Whatever you see is fine with me. And I'll see you in class soon, guys. Thanks so much for paying attention and watching this video. Bye.